Hello and welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to be tier ranking the secondary Kamen Riders. I'll be tier ranking all of them from Agito to the present day with Gav. So without further ado, this is my tier ranking of the secondary Kamen Riders. First is Makoto Hikawa, Kamen Rider G3, and I've always liked him. I've always thought he's been a little slighted in his season, just because he's mostly just used as a butt of a joke, as he always feels like he has to prove himself to Shuichi in his weird ways. But as a character, I just like how he's a normal guy who just wants to save people. I like that he's the only Kamen Rider in all of the seasons where he doesn't even henshin. He just puts on his suit. So I like that about him. I just don't really like how he has very superficial ties to the main mystery of Agito. And really after he gets G3X, he doesn't really do anything after that. Which sucks because I think he can be funny. I like his interactions with the other G3 Commander and people. So overall, he's just a pretty good secondary rider. He's B tier. Next is Ren Akiyama, Kamen Rider Knight. He's pretty much the template for most secondary riders as a badass who is ambivalent towards the main character, but eventually becomes their friend throughout the season. But I think Ren is just the best at it. Obviously, he's the first, so that works. But also, he never sacrifices his ideals to be friends with Ryuki. I really believe his friendship with Shinji, and I just like his personality. Clashes really well with Shinji, and I always like a badass character, so he's A tier. Next is Masato Kusaka, Kamen Rider Kaiza, and he's one of my favorite secondary riders. He's kind of one of the main villains of Thighs. He's a completely irredeemable person who just wants to get with Mari and hates all Orphanox and wants to kill all of them. It's just cool as a mostly antagonistic secondary rider, pretty much the only one that's been done. And he's just such an easy character to hate, especially when he sets up Kiba and Fies a bunch of times. His death is really satisfying. I just don't really like how in some of the movies afterwards they just try to retcon it to make it so that him and Takumi were friends, when in the show that wasn't the case. So he's just a great character, someone who's very easy to hate. I just think he's a great character for that. So he's S tier. Next is Sakuya Tachibana, Kamen Rider Garen, and he's one of the worst secondary riders. I think it has to do with his personality as much as it has to do with just the show in general, how it starts off with Tachibana going through a really bad crisis, and that just makes him feel like a really weird character because we don't know anything about him, and he just comes off as really annoying and overdramatic and just gets tricked by the villains even after he goes through this. I think there's an interesting part in this season where he's basically Lengel's mentor, which is cool, but other than that, he's just a completely forgettable character, gets tricked by the villains way too much, so he's D tier. Next is Ibuki, Kamen Rider Ibuki. He's another really forgettable secondary rider, but I at least like him a little bit. It's mostly because of his relationship with Akira, which I think is really cool. It just has a correlation between him and Akira and Hibiki and Asumu. But other than that, I really don't remember him that much. He's kind of a cool guy, but overall he definitely gets the least amount of focus in Hibiki, but he's fine enough, so he's C tier. Next is Arata Kagami, Kamen Rider Gatak. He's the other main trope of secondary riders where when you have a badass, arrogant primary rider, usually the secondary rider is the more altruistic primary rider type, and that's exactly what Kagami is, except he's the most interesting of that, where he kind of just blindly follows Zect at the beginning, but once he becomes Gatak, he kind of forges his own path. He's just a really great foil to Soji Tendo as a completely altruistic guy who wants to do the right thing, as opposed to Tendo, who really only wants to save one person, at least at first. And the friendship is really wholesome, and they work really well together. So I like Kagami a lot. He's a very likable character. He's A tier. Next is Yuto Sakurai, Kamen Rider Zeranos. He's a very good secondary rider. He originally comes off as very unlikable, but over the course of the season, once you realize that he was kind of forced into this by his future self, and he's erasing his memories every time he transforms into Zeranos, it makes him a lot more likable, and that he does this for Ryoto's sister, and you realize that he's actually a lot more selfless than he's leading on. Makes him a much better character. He has a very wholesome relationship with Deneb, probably the best relationship in that season. And he just ends up being a very good secondary rider. So he's S tier. Next is Keisuke Nago, Kamen Rider Ixa, and he's a decent secondary rider. He's a badass bounty hunter who has an interesting backstory with his father, his reason for becoming a bounty hunter. But I feel like over the course of the season, his bounty hunter stuff kind of just gets left behind and it gets less interesting. I also don't really know why he was antagonistic towards Kiva at the beginning and then he kind of just stops being antagonistic for no real reason once he finds out that Kiva's Wataru. He can have some funny moments, especially when he loses Ixa to Kengo and when he has to go back in time. But overall, he definitely gets less interesting as the season goes along and kind of just a one-note badass character. But I still like him, so he's B tier. Next is Daiki Kaito, Kamen Rider The End. He's a very weird character. I don't like him that much, but he's fine. I like his personality and his interactions with Decade, but his backstory feels completely separated from his character. It doesn't really make any sense with how he ended up being. He's never really explained how he got the DN driver or how he knows Tsukasa, and especially the worst part about him is that I really don't get why he becomes friends with Decade at the end. He was basically just a nuisance to him the entire season, and then in the movie where they're just friends all of a sudden. He's just a very strange character. I like him enough, but he's not great, so he's C tier. Next is Ryu Terui, Kamen Rider Axel, and he's a pretty good secondary writer. He's definitely the normal type as a badass who is ambivalent towards the main characters, but eventually becomes their friend. He has an interesting motivation with going after Isaka the weather dopant because he killed his family, and Shroud enables him by giving him the Axel driver. I just feel like with how Isaka was handled in the season, it kind of messes with his arc, where his first encounter with Isaka kind of goes through his entire arc to not fight for revenge anymore, even though Isaka still sticks around for like another 5 episodes, so I feel like kind of should have been drawn out a little more. I just also don't really like how quickly he forgives Shroud after he realized that she just used him and she gave Isaka the weather guy a memory. So he kind of becomes a generic writer by the end, but I like his relationship with Philip and Shotaro and Akiko especially. So he's a pretty good character, and especially he's really cool. So he's A tier. Next is Akira Date, Kamen Rider Birth. And he's one of my favorite secondary writers. He's so cool. He's the coolest secondary writer out of them all. He has such a cool personality. I mean, he originally comes off as just a greedy guy, just fighting to make money. But once you realize that he's doing it for the surgery that he needs to live, it makes him a lot more sympathetic and makes all his actions understandable. Not to mention he's really cool. And I like his interactions with Eiji. I also just like that he uses cell metals instead of core metals. That's kind of cool. So he's just such a cool character. I like his personality. I like his motivation. He's S tier. Next is Shintaro Goto, the second Kamen Rider Birth. And I always forget he becomes Birth. He's so forgettable. I already didn't really like his character. He's fine as a sidekick to Date, but I just never cared about him. I always forget he is in the season at all, and I especially forget that he becomes Birth after Date leaves. So I just so forgettable. I really wish Date never gave up being Birth, because I don't even remember this guy ever. So he's D tier. Next is Ryusei Sakuta, Kamen Rider Meteor. In a lot of ways, he's just a retread of Axel. They have basically the same personality as Badass and have pretty much the exact same backstory as a Kaijin killed their friend or family, and they're helped by a mysterious masked person to become a Kamen Rider and kill the person who killed their family. Sakuta is kind of interesting as he has to work undercover and pretend to be like this meek weakling when he's like a kung fu master. So in that sense he's cool, but overall just has a very generic personality. I just feel like he's just forgiven for killing Gentaro way too fast. I feel like that could have been an interesting beat, but it's never done. It is cool that he becomes closer friends with the Rider Club through them and becomes a more friendly person, but overall he kind of just feels like too much of a retread of Kamen Rider Axel. He's still good, but not very unique, so he's B tier. Next is Kosuke Nito, Kamen Rider Beast. I've always felt that Wizard was a season that never needed a secondary writer, and Beast is kind of just there. He's mostly just like a bumbling cartoon character with a very over-the-top personality, likes mayonnaise. Near the end, once he becomes a mentor to the youngest Kamen Rider mage, it's interesting. And when he gives up his powers to save everyone, that shows his growth. But overall, he's just a comic relief cartoon character pretty much, and honestly I never felt like he fit in the season. I still like him a little bit because he can be funny, and near the end he had some pretty good moments, but overall just felt like he was never necessary, so he's C tier. Next is Kaito Kumon, Kamen Rider Baron, and he's one of the best secondary writers. He is a badass, but what I like about him is that he never really becomes friends with Kota or sacrifices his worldview. He obviously respects Kota by the end, but his worldview and Kota's worldview are completely opposite, where Kota has a very optimistic worldview. Kaito feels like the weak have to uprise against the strong through force, and that kind of is what leads him down the path to becoming Overlord Baron and kind of sealing his own fate. So he's a very interesting character as an anti-hero, probably as big of an anti-hero as you can get in Rider, but still know that his cause is noble. It's just he has the wrong way of following it out. So he's a great character. He's S tier. Next is Go Shijima, Kamen Rider Mach, and he's my favorite secondary rider. He comes off initially as a happy-go-lucky kind of guy, kind of like Kamen Rider Beast, but over the course of the season you realize he's a very troubled person who really hates the Roymude with all his willpower, and it's just great to see that he eventually builds a friendship with Chase even though he hates the Roymude so bad. So that's just a great arc that he has, going from hating Roymudes to seeing them that they're as human as he is, and that's just a great subversion. Because I don't mind happy-go-lucky characters all the time, but I just like how drastic his actual personality is. So he's just great. He's S tier. Next is Makoto Fukami, Kamen Rider Spectre, and he's an alright secondary rider. If you're just going off the show himself, he's really boring. He's antagonistic very briefly, and I think just the most problem with him is that we never really see how he and Takuro are friends. We're told that they're friends all the time, but never really see that dynamic between them at all. And once he eventually joins with Takuro, he's a pretty boring character. Stuff with the clones is kind of weird, but in the show himself, it's not resolved, so it's just boring. But if you're including Ghost Rebirth Kamen Rider Spectre, the V-Cinema after Ghost, he becomes such an interesting character. His backstory is actually revealed and just makes him a lot more interesting. So if you're going off Ghost Rebirth, he'd be A tier. If you're going off the show itself, he'd be C tier. So I'm just gonna meet in the middle and say he's a B tier character. Next is Hiro Kagami, Kamen Rider Brave, and again, he's a pretty generic secondary rider trope as a badass who is ambivalent towards the rider, but eventually sees their point of view and becomes their friend. I just like that Hero's weird quirk of liking sweets is based off his backstory of his girlfriend succumbing to the Bugster virus and him wanting to save her, although not really much is done with it aside from him joining Kronos for a little bit. The thing I really don't like about his character is how he sacrifices his entire worldview and succumbs to Emu's worldview, where throughout the season they clash about how to treat patients, where Kagami is don't care about the patients as a person because it just interferes with his work, whereas Emu's like, we need to know them as a person. And both worldviews are valid, but in the end Kagami just accepts Emu's worldview, and that's that. And that's kind of lame. That's kind of the problem I have with a lot of modern secondary writers. But he's still a cool character. I wish more was done with his backstory than it is in the show, but he's still decent. He's B tier. Next is Ryuga Banjo, Kamen Rider Cross. He's another one of my favorite secondary riders, mostly because his personality has like kind of a dimwit musclehead, and he just clashes really well with Sento, who's a smartass and is just an intellectual. And they have a lot of really funny interactions, and I really like their relationship. The one thing I don't really like about him is how he is a Volto. I've always thought that's kind of lame. Like, I really don't think we needed to character reveals. Like, we already had Katsuragi is Sento. I don't really think Evolto being Banjo was that good of an idea, but it is what it is. It's interesting kind of, but I don't really think it was done that well. But other than that, his personality, I just like his personality a lot, his relationship with the other characters, and I just like him a lot. He's S tier. Next is Gates Myokoin, Kamen Rider Gates. He's about as generic of a secondary rider as you can get, but just follows the entire through line as a badass, is ambivalent towards the main rider, but eventually becomes their friend. I'm just glad that it didn't take the entire season for him to find that realization. It's really more on the halfway point. And his backstory is never really elaborated on. He fought in the future, and that's pretty much as far as we get. He has some good moments with Sogo, he has some good moments with White Waz, but he's just pretty generic overall, so he's C tier. Next is Isamu Fua, Kamen Rider Vulcan, and he's a character with a bunch of missed potential. He follows the same generic through line as a lot of other secondary riders. Badass, has a different worldview than the protagonist, ambivalent towards him, whatever. His apathy for the Huma Gears is very interesting compared to Aruto, but it's just undone so fast. Like in episode 12, it makes sense, he's saved by Huma Gears, so obviously he won't want to kill all of them after all. But it just happens way too early, especially when the other parts of his backstory where his memories were fabricated and he has a human gear implanted in his brain. That would have been a lot more interesting, as that be the point where he has his arc about liking Human Gears, but by that point he already was nice to Human Gears for like 20 episodes, so it didn't have as much of an impact. Because other than that, he's a pretty generic writer, as I said, for a lot of these. But I still like him. If his backstory was done better, he honestly could have been great. But as it is now, it kind of got fumbled. So he's B tier. Next is Rintaro Shindo, Kamen Rider Blades. I've always found him very weird. Just the way he acts, it's so weird. I don't really know how to describe it. He has such a weird personality. Like, he's kind of like aloof and holier than thou. I don't know, I don't really like his personality. I especially don't like what really ruined his character for me was he pledges his friendship to Toma in like episode 10 or something, and then like one episode later Sabella shows up and is like, kill Toma, and he's like, okay, and then he turns on him for like the entirety of second arc without batting an eye. And that really sucks because it's alluded to that he was raised in sort of Logos, so he has a lot of loyalty to them, but it's never elaborated on. It's never explained at all. It kind of just feels like Tachibana, where he's turning on them for no reason and just irrational. So, not to mention, not much is done with him at all. Very boring character, very weird personality. Even the stuff with Mei was good, but I never really liked it that much. And just like a lot of writers in Saber, just nothing is done with him. And honestly, he's kind of unlikable. So he's D tier. Next is Daiji Igarashi, Kamen Rider Live, and I like that he's not a badass ambivalent type. He's the younger brother to the primary writer, which is an interesting dynamic, but I don't think it's really used that much. The most interesting thing with him is Kagero, which I don't think that's a good thing when the best thing about you is that you're just a conduit for another character, because as he is, he's just a generic good guy, and what really tanks him is around episode 35 or so, when he sides with Akaishi for absolutely no reason and just tanks his entire character. It feels like completely out of nowhere they would side with the villain after Akaishi beats the shit out of him like only a couple episodes earlier, and there's at least an explanation for it. It's because Kagero sacrificed himself to give him Holy Live, but that was like 10 episodes before his heel turn happened, and it makes absolutely no sense. It's so stupid. Again, it's a lot like Tachibana, except I feel like this is even worse. He actively works with the main villain who wants to kill all of humanity for no reason. And even like the reasoning where it's because his devil isn't there anymore. Hiromi, Kamen Rider Demons, had much better. His demon died in the first episode, and that's the reason why he's always like, I'm gonna lay down my life to save everyone. He's not irrationally just wanting to kill everyone because it's for justice or something. It just makes no sense why he would ever work with Akaishi, and that's just the most frustrating thing about his character. He's already wasn't a great character, but this really like tanks him. He's one of the most unlikable characters, because other than that, that's really the only memorable stretch I have of him. Other than that, he's a pretty unmemorable character, so he's just not a good character. He's D tier. Next is Kagero, Kamen Rider Evil. I just wish he was around more. He really is only around for like as a main antagonist for the first arc until like episode 10 where he's defeated, and then after that kind of just becomes a good guy for no reason with no explanation, kind of just appears sporadically until he sacrifices himself. On the wiki it says he's around for 16 episodes, but I feel like that's being really generous. It feels like he's only around for like 7 or 8 maybe, which sucks because he's a lot more interesting. He embodies Daiji's jealousy of Iki, and I would have liked him to be a villain for the entire season, but I mean, it would make sense he would become a good guy just because the whole point of the show is about accepting your inner demons, but he just isn't around enough. He's kind of just a generic goth guy. Still has some moments, but I just kind of wish he was around more and was the main secondary writer over Daiji, so he's C tier. Next is Keiwa Sakurai, Kamen Rider Tycoon. Like Arata Kagami, he's the altruistic counterpart to Ace. In pretty much any other season, he would be the main writer who wants to fight for peace or save all the people deleted in the DGP, which is kind of boring, but it's also wholesome. But I think what makes him pretty good is his heel turn near the end after his sister dies and becomes Black Shogun. It's kind of out of nowhere. It's not really foreshadowed at all, but it's still a cool subversion. I think I like his character more just because of Kekura, and he's kind of boring, but he's still decent, and I like him. He's B tier. Next is Rine Kudo, Kamen Rider Majade, and I really wish she was done better as the first female secondary writer, but as it is, she's just such a boring character. Her only interesting attribute is her relationship with Atropos, which is just really half-baked, and the stuff with her father, which is really only a thing in the first 20 or so episodes. Her personality is just really boring, and it just sucks. Like, we've waited this long to get a female secondary writer, and this is the best they can give. It's just really bad. sees her really, not only as like a writer girl, she's not that good as a secondary writer. She isn't interesting at all. So she's D tier. Finally, Hanzo Karakita, Kamen Rider Valen, and he's a very pleasant surprise. At first, he kind of felt like he was gonna be Vulcan. Pretty much the exact same motivation. He hates the Grey because they kidnapped his mother. And he has kind of a loud personality and can kind of feel like overreacting. But what I like most about him is that he's a very diplomatic person. I feel like a lot of these characters, when they figure out secrets and stuff, they just go off the handle and want to beat up the primary writer. But when Hanzo found out that Shoma was a Grey, he treated it very normally, like he just accepted it and didn't fly off the handle or anything. And when he found out that Shoma knew his mother died, he didn't go off and beat him up and stuff. He just accepted that, well, I just need some space from you for a while. And he just handled it very maturely, which I feel like is not very interesting television, but it's just very refreshing to see like an actual normal reaction to this stuff. Even to like him finding the guy who kidnapped his mother, him not just wanting to go out for revenge and stuff, because by then his arc had already been completed. He accepted that not all Grey are bad, which he learned throughout the season, especially through Vram. And I'm just glad that they didn't dig up his entire arc to do that. And I just like how his personality can be allowed to feel like can be overacting a little bit, but at the end of the day, he acts the most normal, has the most reactions to pretty much all of it as any secondary writer does, and that's just really appreciative and really refreshing. So I like him a lot. He's A tier. So here's my tier list for the secondary writers of Kamen Rider. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? These tier ranking videos are a lot of fun to make. I'll continue to make them, even though they don't get nearly as much views as my Super Sentai videos. I just like talking about Kamen Rider. My next video after this will probably be just about Sentai anniversaries in recent years, just because, especially with Gojuju, I've been really frustrated with it, and I just feel like I want to talk about just my frustrations with like anniversary oversaturation in Sentai recently. But after that, probably do a couple more Kamen Rider tier lists. Tertiary writers next, obviously, and then probably evil writers, and then probably lump all other writers in one video, which is gonna be crazy. But yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy. Feedback is always appreciated. Have a great day.